When fans ask me about my favorite opponents, Rock, Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Undertaker, what about Vader? And I go, yeah, that wasn't fun. And I was like, catch me over the eye so you can, open up my eyebrow. And he goes, how about I break your nose? And I said, sounds good to me. Like I was in the one line of business where losing an ear was not only not a bad thing, it was like a booker's dream. And then they didn't utilize it.
When you go back to WCW, you're put into this main event program with Sting. And you've talked about how Sting initially was maybe a little bit skeptical of working with you. Talk about why that was and the whole experience of being in that top program.
Yeah. Well, Sting was skeptical because the booking committee had not had the same conversation with me that they had with Sting, which was, this guy's one of a rapid succession of people who were going to come in to put you over. It felt like Sting's character had plateaued a little bit. WCW, I loved working for WCW, but there was an issue with talent in that the top talent signed contracts with Turner Broadcasting. Everyone else signed contracts with World Championship Wrestling. And it was said that you had to be a top guy to make top guy money, but you had to be making top guy money to be a top guy. And that's why, as great as some of the wrestling was, at the top of the card, there was an element of sameness there because they had to keep using the same people. So they tell Sting, I'm just coming in to work with him for a few weeks. I'm told I'm coming into a main event program. So I actually got a call before I was supposed to debut, or maybe I had debuted, but I wasn't supposed to be on the road for another month. And I got a call saying, can you make New Jersey Meadowlands? Can you make Boston? Can you make Baltimore? I said, sure. And they said, we had an issue. Nikita Koloff didn't want to put Sting over at house shows, which sounds really strange. Like I did nothing but lose at house shows throughout the entirety of my career, and I'm in the WWE Hall of Fame, right? Like I'm Mick Foley and I lose matches. That's what I did, right? I was proud of it. So now we have the meeting backstage, and Stinger says, hey, any ideas? And I went, oh, I've got a lot of ideas. Like everything I lacked physically, I kind of made up for emotionally, and I had to believe in myself because not a lot of people believed in me when I was coming up. And I started laying out what I wanted to do, and Sting looked at me and he said, I thought you were just here to put me over. Because we didn't have the same knowledge. We didn't share the same knowledge. And I said, I don't see why I can't put you over and get over at the same time. He looked at me a little skeptically. I want to say this is the only disagreement I've ever had with Sting in my entire life. And we worked probably 100 times in WCW. I said, how about this? We'll go out there and we'll do things that I suggested for the first 5 minutes. And if you don't like it, I'll listen to every word you say. And that's exactly, we shook hands on it. We went out there, and after 5 minutes, he said, you call the match. And he loved it because he realized that the only person I posed a danger to was myself. That the crazy things I did were all designed to make him look good. And we had an amazing program and never had another, never had a conflict for the rest of our time together.
So you have the feud with Sting, and then you are programmed with Vader. And you and Vader had this program, very hard-hitting matches. We know about the ear incident, obviously, but in general, talk about working with Vader, working with somebody who has a reputation for being quite stiff. Yeah. You're crazy. So what was that like, putting you two together?
Well, I think everyone has one good turn in them per territory or per company. And every subsequent turn, heel turn to baby, baby to heel, is a case of diminishing returns. And I remember Chris Jericho and I were sitting next to each other on a flight that was 3 hours long, and we passed the entire 3 hours talking about how many times the Big Show had turned. And when we landed 3 hours later, like we were only halfway into his turns, So I had the one big turn in me, and I did. I turned on Harley Race and Leon and Paul Orndorff. The idea was Harley was going to take either me or Paul, whoever could prove to be toughest. And so Paul Orndorff, I mean, I grew up watching Paul Orndorff. He was in the first ever WrestleMania main event, and he was a tough customer. And he had some nerve damage because back in that day, if you were hurt, you didn't get paid unless you worked. And the other thing was he was working with Hogan. No matter what, you're out there in the ring. So one of Paul's arms was noticeably smaller than the other, but he worked so hard that it was actually his stronger arm. And so we had a couple of these matches, give and take. Now that he wasn't a guy that liked to call a bunch of stuff in the back. And then he asked if he could speak to me a couple weeks later. And he said, I just want you to know that I just signed a contract with WCW. And the matches I had with you are a major reason why. And I was one of the nicest things. I'm like getting emotional right now just thinking of it. But in the scheme of things, Harley went with Paul. They jumped on me, and then when I came out for my revenge, it was with a steel scoop shovel. And I was in the back like practicing because we'd never had a class at DiNucci School where we learned to use a steel scoop shovel, right? And I was like flicking it with my wrist, trying to make sure it landed flat. And then Harley Race came over, and Harley is the legend that other legends talk about. And Harley comes over and he goes, if you don't hit him when I get back here, I'm hitting you. I called it putting the fear of Harley into me. And so I come out through the crowd with a scoop shovel as Vader's giving his promo, and he's in the middle of saying, I fear no man, I feel no pain, but it actually came out like this, I fear no man, I feel no, oh! And I hit him as hard as I could in the back. And then Paul fed for a shot, and then Harley fed for a shot. And I'm expecting a whole cavalcade of extra, enhancement talent to come out. And after I hit Kevin Nash and after I hit Mark Canterbury, who went on to be Henry O. Godwin, did give Mark Canterbury a concussion, which I didn't want to do, but I had the fear of Harley in me. And everything went really well. And when I came back, I asked one of the agents, I said, what happened to everybody else? He said, Cactus, when they saw what was going on, they left the building. And so it was a good feud. And we had a couple matches with Paul, a couple matches with Vader. But the problem I had was that for 2.5 years, I think it was 2.5 years, the audience had been led to believe that I either did not feel pain or enjoyed it. So I would come out and I'd get a good reaction, very good reaction, but I noticed there was a lull when my opponent was getting heat on me, and it was like fans didn't feel emotionally invested in the heat or the comeback because I was doing something that I either didn't feel or enjoyed. And so I went to Dusty and I told him the issue, and I said, the one exception is when I work with Leon. He's so big and his stuff looks so good that if he could injure me, like actually injure me in an angle, like that's going to get some sympathy. And then, unfortunately, that angle became lost in Cleveland, which, okay, a lot of you don't know about it. That's for the best. That's for the best. It was so bad that they pulled the plug on it like 6 weeks into a 12-week run where they'd recorded all these vignettes supposed to be, I was lost in Cleveland. I didn't know my name. I became a sailor. I was talking about hoisting the mizzenmast. And not to knock people who are without homes, but and I've worked a lot with the homeless, and they're much more likely to look like your everyday person who's just fallen in hard times. But there is like a prototype. It's like wild hair and crazy eyes, which is kind of what Cactus Jack was. And I was like, how do I look homeless? And I was like, I know. I'll shave off my beard, I shaved my eyebrows, and somebody had a photo I signed either today or yesterday. And I did look quite a bit different. But as far as angles go, it was ahead of its time because it was cinematic, but it just didn't click. So when they pulled the plug, I called it a mercy killing. But I did have a chance to do the angles with Leon. And actually the angles that led up to the, just coming to me now, the angle that led up to the injury was really good. Because I went out there and I said, Leon, I want to do something nobody's done before. And he said, what's that? And I was like, maybe you can beat the living hell out of me for real so people can feel it. And I was like, catch me over the eye so you can open up my eyebrow. And he goes, how about I break your nose? And I said, sounds good to me. But the thing is, I've got a small nose, right? I've got a small nose. And Leon became obsessed with breaking my nose. And he did break it on like the first or second punch, but it wasn't bleeding much. And he just kept hammering me on that broken nose. And it was funny. I remember when I was writing my book, Have a Nice Day. I'm on the plane, and I was in coach back then, right? I was still in coach, and believe it or not, so was Kane, Glenn Jacobs. And we made it look like it was supposed to be Harley who delivered the shot over the eyebrow, because this is a skill that nobody in the current wrestling environment has. And Tommy Dreamer, I know I'm going off on a tangent. Tommy Dreamer in ECW mistakenly thought, because I'd been on the receiving end of hard waves, that's what it was called, boom, right over the eyebrow. It's not about how hard you hit somebody, it's the angle you hit it on. So like, boom, slicing open a piece of paper. Tommy thought that I knew how to do it because I'd been on the receiving end of it. And in an ECW match, after I'd punched him everywhere but the eyebrow like 6 or 7 times, you know how you get punched in the nose, your eyes water even if you're not crying? And Tommy looked at me finally, goes, "Would you please stop punching me?" But Leon was on the offensive, and he split my eye under the eye, over the eye. And when I rolled outside, Harley said, "It's already done." But I wrote it up and I said, "It's already done," grumbled a very sad Harley Race. Like Harley was living to open me up. And I passed it to Glenn Jacobs, and we just got such a kick out of the way we made Harley look like opening up my eyebrow was such a major disappointment to him. But Leon and I had really good chemistry. And the deal with Leon was, if you didn't stand up and give as good as you got, he was going to roll right over you because that was his character, and he defended it. Now, when he showed up in WWE, he had so many people in his ear convincing him that you couldn't be an effective heel unless you were a coward, that his first angle, he came in and he laid out Gorilla Monsoon, but then as soon as the baby faces came, he ran around the ring and ran to the back, and I was like, that's not the Vader that I remember. And I was given almost like free reign to create Mankind on my own. They gave me a leather mask, and anything you liked or did not like about the Mankind character was either, it was either my fault or to my credit. So the Leon you saw in WCW wasn't the Leon I took on Leon you saw in WWE was not the Leon I faced in WCW. But if you were willing to take what he gave out, he could make you look better than you'd ever looked. And that was the case. And he liked it and he respected it. But I will tell you this. When fans ask me about my favorite opponents, and I list off like the top 5 guys, Rock, Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Undertaker, and then I throw Terry Funk in there, they go, "Well, what about Vader?" And I go, "Yeah, that wasn't fun." And they said, "But you guys had great matches." And I'll say, "I agree, but they were not fun. They were rewarding, they were challenging, and they stand the test of time, but they were not fun. You really had to get in the zone." As a matter of fact, in Birmingham, UK, I saw fans at one of the Comic-Cons, maybe for Love of Wrestling. It was 2 people. They said, "I saw you wrestling Vader in Birmingham." And I turned to my friend and I said, "I can't believe they're doing this to each other at a house show." And I said, "That's quite a coincidence because that's exactly what I was thinking while it was going on. I can't believe we're doing this at a house show." But that's the way he worked.
I did want to ask you briefly about, because in 1994 you worked with the Nasty Boys quite a lot with various partners. And I feel like today the Nasty Boys probably aren't thought of as much of a top team as they maybe were in the 90s. What was it like working with Knobs and Zags?
I wrote in my book that they could be a little sloppy and dangerous, but they could brawl. And I wouldn't be surprised if Knobs has that tattooed somewhere on his body, because that was a real compliment to him. The first big match took place just a few weeks after I'd lost my ear in Germany. And I was, to give you the short version, I didn't know my ear was gone. I knew there was an injury. But when I reached up, my exact words in my head were, "Oh, that bad boy's gone." And then my next thought was, imagine the promos. Like, I was in the one line of business where losing an ear was not only not a bad thing, it was like a booker's dream. And then they didn't utilize it. and I was working my way, down the roster. I loved teaming up with Max Payne, but it was like a step down from a few of these main event programs I had. And so I was in a real lull on the afternoon of that match, and I didn't know how I was going to get through it, but it wasn't like you talked a lot with the Nasties, right? It was just one of those things, you go out there and you make things happen. And one of them had a real pool cue. It was hitting me hard with it, and I got this wake-up call like, if you don't start fighting back, you're going to get killed out there. Not killed, but you're going to get swallowed up. And it was just a lot of give and take, and it was good chemistry. And even though it was a fake concession stand brawl, like they set up a concession stand, it was really cool. I mean, it was really good stuff. And the finish, I think, on that first night, Sags were going to pile drive me on a table, which was a big deal at that time. But Sags was about 300 pounds. At that point, I was about 300 pounds, and the table broke. And so we had to we had to come up with another finish. And so I just had Sags, I can't remember, he kicked me or hit me, and I took what's called the Nest T plunge, flat back off that big ramp onto my back. And I'm thinking, all right, that's the end of the match. And now I see Knobs coming at me with a scoop shovel. And to this day, he'll tell you how I reacted. I didn't put my hand up. I turned my head like this so I wouldn't get hit in the nose or the teeth. And he hit me as hard as he could, and that was the end of the match. Came back the next month when Evad Sullivan had been injured, and Kevin and I faced the Nasties, and that was an even better match. Just to go off on another tangent, in the National Hockey League, there was a beloved team, Philadelphia Flyers, and they were known as the Broad Street Bullies. There was a lot of fighting that went on, and the most notorious goon in all of the NHL was a guy named David Schultz, Dave the Hammer Schultz, not Dr. D, David Schultz. And he wasn't intimidated, but he was out of his element. And he came over, he said, can you guys show me how to throw some of those fake punches? And I said, you're a legend here. We're not going to be doing much of that fake stuff, and neither should you. And he said, were you telling me? I said, yes, I'm telling you, hit that guy as hard as you can. And Sags looked over, he had that goofy grin with the one missing tooth, and he nodded like in agreement. And after that, the Hammer started downing beers, and all the pressure was off his shoulders. And when it came time, he pulled that jersey off. He pulled that jersey over Sags' head, and he came in with the uppercuts, and he knocked him silly. But that's the way we did it, That's the way we did it, and it looked good. We protected his gimmick. We had a great match, and it was really a really good send-off. I'd already given my notice, and WCW, instead of burying me, they had me and Sullivan win the tag titles. Then we had a split, and we had a loser-leave town match. But as far as finishes go, that was a pretty good way to go out. But in going back to your question, I did like working with the Nasty Boys, and I think they have been underrated, and Sags has gone through a really tough time physically. I think he lost his home to a fire. I'm not sure. I know there was a fundraiser. And personally, I'd love to see those guys inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame because A, they deserve it, and B, there's no telling what they'll say during their induction speech.